Well, I've got a great guest today. His name is Colonel Walter Boyne, U.S. Air Force retired. We're going to be talking about his wonderful book, Soaring to Glory, the United States Air Force Memorial from the Downing Company Publishers. Colonel Boyne was the director of the National Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. from 1983 to 1986. And of course, he's a combat veteran, aviation historian, and award-winning author of dozens of books. He's one of the few writers to have had both fiction and nonfiction books on the New York Times bestsellers list. Not only that, he's the founder of Air and Space magazine, which is the best-selling aviation magazine in the U.S. and has written hundreds, maybe even thousands by this point, of articles. He's founder also of the Space Channel. Now, a wonderful thing that he did, he negotiated an agreement with NASA to fly an IMAX camera on the space shuttle and directly supervised the production of two of the most successful IMAX films, The Dream is Alive and On the Wing. He's a member of almost every major aeronautical association and is a member of the board of directors of the National Aeronautic Association and a trustee of the Washington Aero Club. He was named Elder Statesman of Aviation, and in 2007, he was enshrined in the Aviation Hall of Fame. This last month, I had the honor to see him awarded the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award at the Air Force Association Air and Space Conference and Technology Exhibit. It is my pleasure to welcome Colonel Boyne, who's speaking to us from his home in Maryland. Is that right, Colonel? Welcome to the show.
That's right, Jacqueline, Maryland.
Maryland. Good state, Maryland. Well, we're so happy to have you here again, and we are going to start by having you give us just a brief overview of what the book is all about.
Well, of course, the book concerns the beautiful United States Air Force Memorial, and it's located in Washington, D.C., very near the very meaningful and memorable Arlington National Cemetery. And it is a tribute to all of the people who have served in the United States Air Force and its predecessor organizations, going all the way back to the Air Service and beyond. And it also is a tribute to the people who've lost their lives. There are some 54,000 airmen have given their lives in defense of the country, and we wanted to honor them.
Absolutely, and it is a beautiful, beautiful memorial. I had Zenos Fridakis on the show last week, Walt, and who talked about the Honor Guard sculpture that he created to welcome visitors to the Air Force Memorial itself. So give a brief description, first of all, of the main component of the memorial designed by the well-known architect James Ingo Fried, who's also well known for his other designs, the Ronald Reagan building, for example. But sadly, he didn't live to see the completion of the memorial. So talk about that beautiful spiral.
Well, the most obvious and the most impressive thing, of course, are the three arcs that reach up from the ground in a beautiful curving manner to look almost exactly like three airplanes leaving an exhaust trail,
yes,
disappearing into infinity. Stainless steel, they reflect all the colors of the sun. They're beautiful at night as well, the way they're illuminated. And they rise up from a really perfect serendipitous spot. They are placed on a plateau that overlooks, as I say, the Arlington National Cemetery and the Pentagon. But beyond that, from the site, you can see the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol Building and so forth. So it's a perfect site. And then, as a part of the architect's approach, the site, when you visit it, is very, very integrated into the other elements of it, some granite walls with inscriptions and the landscaping and the paving and so forth. So it's truly memorable. I think that if anyone comes to it, walks to the center of the site and looks straight up and sees these beautiful stainless steel elements soaring above them, you almost feel like you are being launched. It's a remarkable sense.
Oh, absolutely. I did it myself, and I would imagine that anyone who visits does the same thing. You've got to look up to see it. It's just beautiful and amazing. And as you said, it's It's in a wonderful location, and close to Arlington. You can actually hear taps playing and the gun salute. It's a wonderful location. Let's talk about. Over how many years did this take place from the time of conception, well, the time of first talking about it, to then its completion?
I think almost everybody in the Air Force felt a little embarrassed and ashamed that we didn't have one. So there was an element for many, many years of people feeling a little uncomfortable if there wasn't an Air Force museum. But if you wanted to put a time on the date when it really began to gather momentum, you have to go to 1991, and a good friend of mine, Ollie Crawford, was then a powerful figure in the Air Force Association, and he was moving towards the idea that we really should have a memorial, not only to honor everybody, but to remind people of its current importance and to, just establish it equally with the Marine Memorial, which is so beautiful, and the Navy Memorial, which has been successful. So I would say that the midsummer of 1991 could be used as a tentative starting date.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of problems initially associated with it, as I recall from the book. It was supposed to first be created near the Iwo Jima Memorial, and then that didn't work. What happened with that? Why did that happen?
It was an interesting and fortuitous set of circumstances, as it turned out. We had some very good leaders. Lieutenant General Bob Springer was the president of the foundation at the time, and he went through all of the hurdles that you have to go through in Washington to create a memorial. You just can't slap one up. You've got to go through the Fine Arts Commission and Site and Design Commissions and many, many elements to make sure that you can get it. And as it evolved, there were really only 3 sites in the Washington area in which were at all suitable for an Air Force memorial.
Mm-hmm.
One was near the Air and Space Museum, which would have had a lot of traffic but was small. Another was located in another area, which was also inaccessible. And the third was located, perhaps 500, 600 yards in a straight line from the famous Iwo Jima Memorial. And it was not as satisfactory in terms of visibility. It was sort of in a hollow. But it did have the advantage, of course, of the visitation to the Marine Memorial, the Iwo Jima Memorial. And so ultimately, by sort of fait accompli, that was selected as the site. And the Air Force committee that Bob Springer was heading had notified the Marine Commandant that this was going to take place, and we went to Congress, and everybody was notified. And a competition was held for a memorial to be erected there. One of the problems that was implicit in that location was that the new memorial could not be higher than the Marine Memorial or detract attention from it or cause transportation problems. So it called for some special thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so things proceeded, but there was an element, not from the Marines themselves, but from some local Marine residents who took exception to the idea that their memorial would somehow be supplemented, certainly not superseded, but supplemented by an Air Force memorial. And they actually got a court injunction to halt the construction of an Air Force memorial there. And this was really very difficult because although the Marines had been notified, the Air Force Association and the Air Force did not wish to get into any kind of a public conflict. And I have to say that during this entire period and subsequently, it handled the situation with really dignity and professionally. There was never any acrimony on the part
I'm
of the
sure
Air
of
Force
that.
Association.
I'm sure of that, and that's understandable. I suppose that a particular group would feel that way, but also the other point too was that the architect and others wanted the Air Force Memorial to be visible from the air and and after in every direction. So now, I mean, it is serendipitous that now you can view it from just about every point in D.C. When I was driving to the convention, I went past it and I saw it coming in from the air, and it's really quite inspiring to see that. So that was a wonderful thing that happened. Now,
there's a poignant backstory to that.
Yes.
The architect Fried had designed a memorial that met the requirements to be on the Iwo Jima site. The Air Force Association had no choice but to proceed because they couldn't halt the process simply because of the junction. They continued to gather money, and the competition went on. And the design that he came up with and was selected as a winner was necessarily somewhat compressed. You could see it from above. It represented the many things, but in one of the things it did represent was the Air Force Star. And I have to tell you, though, that it was not generally liked by anyone. I think had it been constructed in full scale, people would have grown to like it. But it did not really immediately fascinate anybody. Well, there were the usual political maneuvering. And we had friends, and the late Senator Ted Stevens and Senator Warner, some others. And it had turned out that the temporary buildings, and that there's a quotation mark on the temporary buildings that had been built in 1941 and were currently called a Navy Annex, were going to be torn down in about 15 years. But that was too long to wait. But these friends, working with everyone, managed to get the first one torn down and be converted to this site. Now, the new site was just totally different than the one by the Marine Memorial. As I say, it was on a plateau. It was so perfect that no one could believe their good fortune.
Yes, yes. Now, the spires reach 270 feet, and I think I'm not sure whether that's the average of each of the spires, and it's exceeded in height by only the Washington Monument, the National Cathedral, and the U.S. Capitol. Was the original idea for this design, the conceptual idea of it, was it immediately agreed that it had to be something reaching into the sky because of the symbolism of it and the beauty of it?
No, some things had transpired, some natural management changes that occurred over time. One of them, perfect one from the point of view of the committee, was that Ross Perot Jr. was brought on as chairman of the foundation, and he not only lent his own considerable talents, he put many of the talents of his several companies behind it. And so it was agreed that there would be a second competition for a design. Nothing was specified in terms of arcs or height or anything. And but everybody felt a little bit sad because no one felt that Mr. Fried's design would succeed in a second competition, and he was quite ill. He had multiple sclerosis and very difficult to understand, and no one felt that he could possibly have the energy to create a second design which would win a second competition. But the president of the foundation by that time was Major General Ed Grillo, and he was called by Mr. Fried, who was very difficult to understand on the phone, but the thrust of his conversation was, what are the limits on the design? And Mr. Ed Grillo came back and said, well, don't consider to have any limit. Then Mr. Fried had been taken on trips around the Air Force and seen the Thunderbirds, and he began sketching essentially the objections that were raised to the original location of the Air Force Memorial. Resulted finally in the Air Force Memorial having the best possible site in the city. It was a very serendipitous outcome.
Absolutely. You know, just very quickly, I think probably people are sitting in their cars or sitting at home wondering, why did it take so long for the Air Force Memorial to exist in the first place?
It's a characteristic of the Air Force. The Air Force is always so forward-focused that nobody took the time within the ranks of the Air Force to look back on it, and it took a certain while for the right people to come to the fore, and Ollie Crawford led the Air Force Association as part of that right group of people.
Well, that makes sense. what was extremely interesting to me in the book, and the book is filled with wonderful, wonderful photographs and sketches and everything else. At what point was a decision made to have the bronze honor guard sculpture almost, when you walk into the location, it's almost like the guard is waiting there to greet you, and they are there guarding the memorial itself. At what point was it that decision reached to include that?
Early on, Alan McCarter, former FAA administrator, currently head of Airbus industry in the United States, former fighter pilot, he wanted an honor guard there because honor guards take part in all the American Air Force ceremonies, And he persisted in this, and I have to say that he was the prime cause, so that he was always going to be there. Alan was going to make sure that it was there.
It was the right decision.
It was, and then you have to congratulate Mr. Freed in seeing how that could be incorporated into the entire body of the work. So
yes.
It was a happy decision.
It's wonderful, and there, as I mentioned earlier, there is a book out by Zenas Frudakis, who completed that sculpture, about the building of it, creation of it, which is also a wonderful book. The construction issues in building a structure that high of stainless steel that could, as you said in your book, withstand wind and seismic forces, yet still balance symmetrically, was quite an issue, because the final weight is 1,700 tons of spires. That's amazing.
And it's possible only because of the things you never see, the work that they did underground to make it possible.
Talk about that a little bit and how that works.
One of the great things of the designer was that he designed a set of spires of enormous size, enormous weight, but so designed that they would actually, in a calm, just stand on their own base. But they are connected to this immense, huge underground infrastructure, tons and tons, many more tons of cement underground than above ground, that stabilize it and secure it, so that it's guaranteed by the builders to, withstand almost hurricane-force winds.
Now, that's part of that, too. First of all, the underground weight of it, I read in your book, weighs 4,900 tons below ground. And the thing that is really the most exciting concept to me that helps all of that is what's called the ball in the box, which are the dampers. Can you are you able to talk about that a little bit and how it works?
Yeah, sure. There was concern that you get a harmonic vibration in the wind, and that the spires themselves could shake themselves to destruction, and
sure.
So he wanted to put a stabilizer, a dampener on that, and an English firm, designed a system in which a 1,600-pound solid steel ball would be placed in a padded chamber, and there would be padded chambers, 6 in the largest spire, 3 in the second tallest spire, and 1 in the shortest spire, which is about 200 feet. And when the spire vibrates, the ball moves back and forth into these padded chambers. It soaks up the vibration and dampens, like a shock absorber on a car, the movement of the spire. Very, very clever.
Well, not only clever, but when you talk about the weight of it, I mean, the lead ball is about 20 inches in diameter and weighs about 1,600 pounds, and yet it all works like this little delicate, like these music boxes or these little balance toys that you see.
Exactly right.
How much do the spires move in a wind? Do you know that? Is that known?
I just the approximation. They were saying that they might move, the tips move 18 inches.
18 to 20 inches. So, is it noticeable if you're standing there on the ground?
No,
you can't tell, huh?
You cannot tell. The distance is so great that movement is just not. I suppose if you were in a helicopter flying right next to it, you might see it, but from the ground, it's not visible.
It's amazing. And of course, before this was completed, before the design, the whole concept was completed, no metal fabricator had ever attempted anything like this before. So once everyone got to that point, then the first challenge was in handling these huge sheets of 3/4 inch steel and to be able to move them as well as the welding process that would make the spires that tall. What was the most worrisome issue among many about the different problems involved?
Well, I think the thing that was most difficult, the welding of it was critical, but they had 4 different methods: ultrasonic, X-ray, dye test, and otherwise to test the weld. So they're confident that the structures were sound, but then they had to be erected and welded together. And so you would put in a section of the spire, and you would do the necessary infrastructure of concrete bar within it. Then a crane would lift the second section up, and it would have to be welded. And now you don't have the luxury of a jig in a factory to work it, and you don't have all the luxury of the X-rays and so forth. So the welding has to be very, very, very tight. And I think that's probably what people considered the thing most fraught with danger.
And also the fact that there had to be welders working hundreds of feet above the ground. Of course, I know welders have done that before in skyscrapers and everything, but this is a little different. Did they have to build some kind of scaffolding or something, or did they all work from a crane that you described?
No, they built scaffolding, but you learn the true meaning of the word blasé when you see these chaps step out on a little scaffold and weld in a wind and lay down a bead on a 3/4-inch steel juncture. I mean, they were craftsmen too, and artists too.
Yeah, a mutual admiration society, because here's these ex-Air Force people admiring them, and I'm sure the welders were admiring the people that represented the Air Force.
Absolutely.
Part of the other thing too, I mean, it's just amazing to me. First of all, how long did it actually take from the time that the parts were together? What did they do first? Did they do the structure, the concrete base first, or as far as the actual installation, and then come along with the spires? Is that how it worked?
Right. It was very systematic and very, very tightly scheduled. In fact, if you look at the schedule, your first assumption would be it couldn't be done, because the holes had to be dug, the steel had to be put in, the concrete had to be laid, the base had to be made, the spires had to be brought in and attached. Very, very difficult, and all on a very smooth schedule, so that work would be going on simultaneously on more than one spire at a time. I mean, and the spires are not hollow. The spires were designed to be filled to about 60% of their length with concrete. So and you just don't pour concrete at a rate, that goes swiftly. So it's a very, on the one hand, an extremely time-consuming process, but a very time-demanding schedule.
How long did it actually take?
You have me right there. I don't have the figures at my hand, but I know that the construction started with the idea of completing it by the 18th of September, and in, I believe, 2004, and it became evident that wouldn't quite do it, so they moved it 1 month.
Well, to me, the whole, like you said, the fact that it even could be done is amazing. And then to do it, to work so smoothly. Were there any major problems during the construction that set things back, or was it a fairly smooth moving situation?
There was one incident that most people would probably like to forget, and that was that during one concrete pour, incredibly, somehow the concrete got into the very damping balls we were talking about.
Oh, wow.
And they had to be recovered from that. And, of course, this occurred about a week before the scheduled opening.
Of course.
I mean, things were so close. There are lots of round-the-clock work done at that point.
The other part that I think about too is there's really no practice kind of system, is there, to find out if this is all going to work? I mean, I know there's engineers involved and probably mathematicians and all of that, figuring out what they have to do in order for this to happen and that to happen. But it's almost like, okay, you've got one chance and you've got to get it all right. And fortunately, sounds like they got it all right.
Yes, it could have occurred that a very, very major thing could have happened at the last moment, and they wouldn't have been able to open, and that would have been tragic. Ultimately, they would have recovered, of course, but to announce an opening date and then not make it, that's just not the Air Force style.
Well, that's right. What time of the year was this overall being done? It had to be done in decent weather.
Well, they worked all through the winter and the summer.
They did.
Yes, and if you would have seen the place 2 weeks before the actual opening date, you would have sworn it couldn't possibly make the date, because the landscaping and some of the fixtures, like some of the restrooms and so forth, seemed to be so far from completion. And yet, when the time came, everything was beautifully ready.
That must have been some crew that you had together doing it, and of course the people overseeing it. And one must give credit to the pre-planning on all of this and all of the committees that were involved. Just the idea of thinking of, there were probably hundreds of people, if not more, involved in the whole process. And so I imagine that a lot of credit has to be given to those people that really worked on all of that.
Right, and they worked together very well. It seemed that each of the many people involved, the architects, the steel fabricators, the riggers, the Air Force Association, had a couple of key people to whom you could go with any problem, and they would be, they would get it sorted out for you. And that smaller, somewhat intimate group worked together very closely. And then the crews were so determined to make it happen. I mean, you really had a loyal bunch, right down to the people put it in the plans, determined to make it happen correctly.
There had to be great pride on the part of the workmen involved in such a marvelous memorial. I'm sure of that. Exactly.
They all felt and took from it some just personal pleasure, in seeing it work so well.
And Pete Lindquist, who is now the director of the Air Force Memorial, he was involved in the early part of things too, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. Pete was he's the most meticulous, unflappable guy. No matter what the problem was, he was never disturbed by it. He just got together busy to figure a way out, and had many excellent suggestions too on things that were not just on the administrative side. He had a good eye for what would work and what would not work. The entire Air Force and the public owe a great deal to Pete for his work then and his work now.
Yes. And I want to mention again, for those of you that might just be tuning in, I'm talking to retired Colonel Walter J. Boyne, U.S. Air Force, about his book, Soaring to Glory, the United States Air Force Memorial. And anyone out there listening that's heading to D.C. has to see the newest of this memorial, because it is just amazing. Walt, how are the funds raised for this monument?
Well, they were raised in large part by corporate contributions. There's no gainsaying the fact that over the years, the big companies that have prospered by supplying good equipment to the Air Force felt a sense of loyalty